The great space station floated like a dark crown in the silent heart of known space, its towers of silver and metal stretching into the endless black, its lights shining like a city. Suspended in the void, this was the place where the Galactic Council met, the oldest and most powerful gathering in the galaxy. Every wall inside the station was polished like glass. Every doorway was guarded by soldiers from many species, their eyes watching the crowd as leaders from every world walked toward the main chamber, their voices low with worry and their steps quick as if danger was chasing them. The meeting had been called in great haste after strange and troubling reports spread from far star systems. Some spoke of fleets found adrift with no life, left aboard, some of cities on distant worlds reduced to cold ruins, their skies choked with smoke and their oceans turned dark with ash. Each new message brought to the council was worse than the last, and none of them carried hope. In the center of the great chamber, the council members took their seats on high, curved benches shaped from black stone, their symbols carved into the arms of the seats. The air was heavy and cold with the weight of what was coming. A massive screen hung in the air above the council floor, its surface glowing a pale white before flashing into color. The first image made the crowd gasp. It showed a battle frozen in time, ships torn open like paper, their metal frames glowing red from heat, drifting slowly in a field of broken weapons and shattered hulls. The next image was worse, a world once bright with oceans and green lands now gray and lifeless, its cities nothing but skeletons of stone and steel. The silence of the pictures was almost louder than sound, as if the whole chamber could hear the screams that had once filled those places. The screen went dark for a breath, then two words appeared in giant red letters that seemed to burn in the eyes of all who looked. Category red, the highest danger level known in the galaxy. It was a warning rarely given and never ignored, a mark that meant any contact could lead to war and death. It was a signal to hide, to flee, to prepare for the worst. The room was filled with whispers, many voices trembling, some sharp and fearful, others low and cold. Leaders leaned toward each other, speaking in their own tongues, their hands tight on the edge of their seats. A group of smaller alien delegates rose quickly and left the chamber, not even waiting to hear the full report, their footsteps echoing down the long hall outside, as if they feared the words themselves could harm them. In the great silence that followed, the council speaker stood at the center of the floor, his tall frame covered in a robe of deep blue marked with gold stars, his face a mask of heavy thought. His voice carried through the air, slow and deliberate. He said, only one species fits this level of danger. One species alone has shown this power, this unshakable drive to destroy when pushed. The crowd seemed to lean forward to hear the name, though many already knew it. The speaker took in a long breath, and his eyes swept over the chamber, as if counting every soul present. Then he spoke the word humans. The sound of it seemed to ripple through the air and crawl into every ear. Some council members flinched, others turned their eyes away, a few nodded, as if this only confirmed what they had feared for years. The whispers grew louder, some full of anger, others full of dread, until the air itself seemed to shake from the rising noise. Far above the floor, in a shadowed corner of the chamber balcony, a lone figure stood away from the light, his body still, his eyes hidden under the dark brim of a hood that fell low over his face. The figure did not move as the word human spread like a wave through the crowd. He only watched, silent and still, while the council continued. Below, the dim light from the giant screen washed over him just enough to reveal the glint of metal at his wrist and the faint outline of a strange badge on his chest. The figure was human, though no one in the chamber seemed to know that his presence here was not by chance. He had been sent. He listened to every word spoken, every fear, every accusation, his mind sharp and cold as he took in the way the council reacted, the way they looked at each other with suspicion, the way they spoke of humans as if they were a force of nature and not a people. The figure leaned ever so slightly on the railing, his eyes fixed on the council speaker, who now spoke of sealing borders and strengthening fleets, who now spoke of avoiding all contact with Earth at any cost. The human knew this meeting was not just about fear, it was about power. It was about who would stand together and who would stand alone when the time came, it was about more than reports of destroyed fleets and dead cities. It was about control, and the council feared that humans could not be controlled. He could feel the heat of the council's tension filling the air, and in that heat, he could sense something else, a weakness, a fracture in their unity, the kind of weakness humans had learned long ago to exploit. Below the balcony, the council speaker called for order, his voice cutting through the noise as he announced that a vote would be held soon, a vote that could shape the fate of the galaxy for generations to come. The choice was simple: to classify humans as Category Red and send warnings to every corner of the stars, or to leave the warning unspoken and risk what might come. The speaker's voice grew heavier as he repeated the words Category Red, and the crowd shifted in their seats like prey that had just seen the shadow of a predator pass overhead. The human in the shadows stayed silent, his breathing slow and steady, his eyes never leaving the council floor. He could hear the distant sound of the station's great engines humming through the walls, a steady beat, like a heart, the heart of the galaxy itself. Still unaware of the storms that might be coming, he knew that once the vote was made, nothing would be the same, not for the council, not for the galaxy, and not for humanity. His lips moved just slightly, as if whispering words only he could hear, words that carried both a promise and a threat. The council chamber remained heavy with silence. Though the speaker had called for order, the air felt like it could break under the weight of so many eyes and so many thoughts. Every leader present seemed to carry the same mix of fear and pride: fear of what humans could do, and pride in the belief that their own worlds might stand against such danger, even if deep inside they knew that was not the truth. The giant screen above the floor still glowed faintly with the words Category Red, and that glow cast a red haze across the stone walls like blood seeping into the room itself. From a shadowed balcony, the lone human continued to watch, his hood still low over his eyes, his body as still as the cold rail in front of him, yet inside his mind was moving like a storm. He thought of the reports shown moments ago and how much they left unsaid. He knew the fleets destroyed were not accidents, and the cities in silence were not abandoned. They were warnings sent across the void, and the message had reached its mark. The council was now divided, afraid and suspicious, and that was the first step toward the outcome he needed. On the floor below, a delegate from the insectoid worlds rose from her seat, her chitin armor clicking with each movement. She spoke in a voice that was sharp and quick, calling humans a threat beyond reason, saying no other species had fought so many wars, even among their own kind. No other species had turned entire landscapes into wastelands simply to win a battle. Her words struck the air like blades and drew nods from many nearby. Her hands moved as she spoke, painting images in the air of fire across oceans and skies, turning black from smoke. Another delegate rose, this one a tall-scaled being from the warm star clusters, his voice deep and slow. He agreed with the insectoid and added that humans were clever in ways more dangerous than strength alone. He told the chamber the humans would smile as they learned your language, trade with your merchants, share your meals, and all the while search for the weakness that would one day allow them to take what they wanted. He warned that the old stories from the edge of the galaxy were not stories at all, but memories of encounters where humans had walked away and others had vanished forever. The human on the balcony listened to every word, his face unreadable under the hood. He knew some of these tales were twisted shadows of truth, and some were entirely lies, yet each one served a purpose. Each one fed the image the council feared, and that fear would make them act in ways that could be predicted and turn to his advantage. Below, the debate grew hotter, voices overlapping in dozens of languages, some delegates calling for immediate action to seal trade routes and close borders, others warning that such moves would provoke the very war they hoped to avoid. The council speaker raised his hand, and the noise fell back into uneasy quiet. His voice carried again, slow but strong. He told them the decision would not wait until the next cycle. It would be made before the stars outside the station shifted even a fraction. He announced that each delegate would cast their vote in private, and the result would be binding for all worlds present. The words carried finality like a gate closing, and in the high balcony, the human tilted his head just slightly. The plan he carried in his mind now had a clock ticking down. Outside the great chamber, The wide halls of the station were already busy with movement messengers rushing between offices, guards in dark armor checking passes and scanning for weapons. The news of the meeting had spread faster than light in these corridors, and every crew member from every dock ship now whispered of humans, and wore some spoke with hate, some with respect, and some with a strange mix of both. Far from the noise, near an old maintenance hatch, the human from the balcony moved quietly. Through the shadows, the hood still drawn low as he passed unnoticed among the workers. He reached a small chamber lit by a single strip of pale light. Inside waited a figure much shorter with pale fur and quick eyes that darted like sparks. This was a contact, one of the few who knew the truth of why the human was here. Their meeting was silent. At first, only the soft sound of a data chip sliding across the table from the human to the furred figure, and the sound of a small device humming as it began to read. The chip lines of light danced over the furred figure's face as he scanned the contents. The chip held information that was not part of the Council's official reports. It showed that some of the destroyed fleets had not fallen in open battle, but in the dark, quiet way of sabotage. It showed that some of the ruined cities had been abandoned for years before the fires came. It showed that a hand unseen was guiding the chaos to make humans look like the only ones who could be responsible. The furred figure looked up at the human with eyes that asked, without words, if this meant the Council was being played, and the human gave a single slow nod. They both knew the truth was dangerous here. If the Council found this evidence, it could shift the vote, or it could cause a hunt for whoever carried it. And so the chip was not meant for the Council. It was meant for someone else far away, someone who could use it to turn this storm in a different direction. The furred figure slipped the chip into a hidden pocket and left through a side passage. Without a word, the human followed moments later, disappearing back into the endless halls where every voice still carried the same word: humans. Back in the chamber, the voting had begun, each delegate stepping into a private alcove where a single crystal sphere waited, their hands resting on the sphere as their choice was sent to the central core of the station. One by one, they emerged, faces set and unreadable, though their eyes sometimes betrayed the fear beneath. The speaker watched from his high platform, knowing that whatever the result, he would stand before the galaxy and speak it aloud. Soon the chamber would know, soon the galaxy would know, and soon the human in the shadows would make his next move. In the high balcony, once again, the human returned unseen by most. The hood still low, his hands resting on the rail. He could see the pattern forming in the way the delegates moved, and in the small signals they gave their allies, a tilt of the head, a quick shift of the eyes. He could already guess the outcome, and his lips curled in the faintest shadow of a smile. For him, the vote was only the opening act. What came after would be the real play, and in that play, humans would not be the prey. The chamber lights dimmed, and the last vote was cast, and the human waited for the moment when the speaker would rise and speak the word that would set the galaxy on fire. The chamber was silent once more as the speaker stood tall on his platform, the shadows of the high wall stretching like claws across the floor. The great crystal behind him glowed with shifting light as the votes from every delegate merged into a single result. The glow deepened into a cold blue, and every being present leaned forward, hearts, minds, and whatever passed for nerves in their species locked on the outcome. The speaker's voice came slow, heavy, each word striking like a hammer. The Council had decided humans would be marked as an apex threat to all worlds. The words rippled through the room like a wave through a still ocean. Some delegates lowered their heads in grim satisfaction. Others exchanged quick, sharp looks of triumph. Yet in other corners, there was unease, whispers, and soft tongues warning of what this would mean to trade, to alliances, to the fragile balance of power across the stars. For once, every world here would have the same enemy, the same shadow to aim their fleets and their fears toward. In the high balcony, the hooded human did not move. His eyes fixed on the speaker, his breath calm, slow, steady. The speaker raised his hand again, and the council guard began to lock the exits, not to keep the delegates in, but to ensure no one could enter and disturb. What came next, a decree, was read from a thin strip of crystal light. It stated that effective immediately, all human ships in neutral space would be detained, all human colonies under council jurisdiction would be monitored, and any human military presence outside their own territory would be treated as hostile. This was the moment the human had waited for, and yet the faint curve of his lips hinted at a deeper plan. Beyond the chamber, the message was already racing across the station, carried in quick bursts of data and whispered across crowded halls. Crews on docked ships began sealing hatches and preparing for sudden departure. Merchant captains weighed the profit of staying against the risk of being caught in a net meant for humans. In the quiet edges of the station, armed patrols were already redirecting their routes, their eyes sharper, their hands closer to the triggers of their weapons. The air felt charged, as if the entire structure floated not in space, but in the eye of an approaching storm. In the balcony, the human turned away at last, his hood shadowing his face as he slipped back into the dim corridors. Each step measured, each turn planned. The decision of the council was the spark now. It was time for the fire. His path took him not to the docking bays or the trade decks, but deeper into the old heart of the station, where the walls still bore the marks of tools from centuries past, where few came unless they knew the forgotten routes here. He moved without sound until he reached a door of black metal carved with faint runes. Inside the room was a single table, and on it a communication unit older than the council itself. The human powered it with a twist of a hidden latch, and the old machine hummed alive, casting a pale gold light over his hands. He keyed in a sequence no modern system would recognize, and somewhere across the void a receiver answered with a single tone. Low and steady, a voice came not through sound, but through thought shaped into words inside his mind. The voice asked if the stage was ready, and the human answered with one clear, silent word: yes. The mind on the other end carried no shape, no face, yet the feeling it gave was vast and cold like the darkness between galaxies. It told the human that fleets were already moving in the outer sector, ships without flags, armed with weapons unseen in centuries. They would not appear as human ships, yet their strikes would be aimed to look like human hands. This would push the council beyond politics into war. The human listened without a change in his breathing. This was the second part of the plan, and it was already in motion far from here. When the link faded, the human left the room, locking it behind him, his steps now quick yet still quiet. He emerged again into the brighter halls where delegates were leaving the chamber, some speaking in hushed tones, others walking with stiff pride. None noticed the hooded figure slip among them, his presence swallowed by the tide of bodies. As he moved toward the observation deck, from here, the entire station stretched below like a city hanging in the stars. The ships docked around it gleamed under the glow of the nearest sun, their hulls like silver bones in the black. He stood there watching as a small shuttle pulled away from the docking ring, a shuttle carrying the furred figure who had taken the data chip earlier. The human knew the route the shuttle would take, the hidden refueling stop, the coded broadcast that would send the evidence toward a world far from the council's reach, a world that might yet shift the path of this war. If it survived the journey long enough to be heard, the human watched until the shuttle became a pinprick, then turned his eyes back to the massive fleets docked in the shadows of the outer ring. The council speaker's voice came again through the station intercom, this time for all to hear. It declared that enforcement orders were active. All crews were to submit to inspection, all cargo to be scanned, all human citizens on board to be detained for questioning. The words spread a visible ripple across the decks as patrols moved faster and weapons glinted in the hands of guards. The human knew he had little time left before the first searches reached the observation deck, yet he did not move, his gaze fixed on one ship at the farthest dock, its hull painted black. That ship was his way out, not because it was his, but because it belonged to no one here, a ghost ship taken from the wreckage of a forgotten battle, its systems altered to hide from scans, its engines tuned to run silent and dark. He had hidden it here days ago under a false registry, and now the moment had come to use it. As the first alarms began to echo through the deck, he stepped away from the rail, moving with the flow of the crowd until the path split, and he took the darker, quieter corridor that led to the dock. Each step was shadow and echo, the sounds of distant orders and boots on metal carrying through the walls ahead. Two guards turned at the sound of his approach, but their eyes passed over him without pause, his hood and slow pace, making him just another traveler in the chaos. Soon he reached the final gate, and the black ship beyond it silent, waiting, its ramp lowered. As if expecting him, the human crossed the dock without looking back, his mind already on the next point in the plan. Once this ship moved, nothing would stop the chain of events already falling. In the chamber behind him, the last delegates were leaving, the council guards sealing the doors, and the speaker standing alone, with the results still glowing in the crystal blue light outside the station. Ships began to undock and vanish into the dark, each one carrying fear, anger, and the seed of a war that would stretch across the galaxy. The hooded human did not see this, for he was already in the black ship's cockpit, hands on the controls engines. Rumbling low, he looked once toward the stars ahead, and in that look was not fear, but a promise. The black ship slid into the endless dark, its hull vanishing against the stars' engines running silent. As it moved far from the station, the human pilot kept his eyes on the navigation display, a thin line of light tracing his path through sectors known for old wrecks and drifting debris. Here, no patrols came often. Here, one could vanish into the folds of space. He knew time was short, for soon the fall strikes would begin across Council space, and the blame would fall heavy on humanity before the truth could even breathe in the minds of the fearful. Far away in the Alara sector, a mining platform floated above a pale green world, its tunnels reaching deep into the crust, pulling out rare metals needed for ship hulls and weapon cores. The workers were tired, their shifts long, their guards few. When the attack came, it was not with ships or fleets, but with a silent wave of code slipping through the comm relays, locking every hatch, sealing every airlock before the platform's alarms even sounded. The lights failed, replaced by the red glow of emergency strips, and the slow hiss of pressure loss began in the outer decks. On the Council station, reports began to flow in the Alara platform, crippled. Dozens feared lost transmission fragments, showing shadowed figures moving through smoke, carrying weapons that matched human designs. The images were blurred, grainy, yet clear enough to paint the picture that the Council wanted. The speaker wasted no time issuing a statement to every channel declaring the attack an act of human aggression, a direct assault on the lifeblood of the galaxy, and proof that the designation of humanity as an apex threat was not only correct, but urgent. The words spread like a storm through every system. In another corner of the galaxy, the merchant convoy Sealand Star drifted through a trade route heavy with cargo containers. Its escorts relaxed after weeks without incident. The attack came with a sudden rip of space as 3 ships burst from hidden jump points, their hulls black, their weapons spitting fire. The convoy shields collapsed in seconds, and escape pods filled the void. The attackers took nothing, leaving only wreckage floating in silence. Yet, when the Council reviewed the fragments of sensor data, the black ships appeared under human registry codes that the human in the black ship knew were forged. Back on the black ship, the human listened to the broadcast, his face still calm, his hands steady on the controls. He was not surprised to hear the outrage in the voices of delegates calling for immediate strikes against human worlds, nor was he surprised by the fear in the voices of traders and settlers begging for protection. Fear was the fuel that would drive the Council to act without thought, and every false strike added more of it. Soon they would not be debating, they would be launching fleets, and the galaxy would tip into a war that could not be undone. Yet the humans' plan was not to start a war for chaos alone. There was something deeper, a thread woven through every move. The Council's unity was not as strong as it seemed. Beneath the polished speeches and ceremonial votes lay old grudges and hidden rivalries. And when the fire grew hot enough, those cracks would widen until the great alliance shattered into fragments. His task was to build the fire and then aim the pieces toward his true enemy, the one who had stood in shadow while the Council turned its eyes on humanity, the one the human had not named. In the Rimward systems, a communications hub was the next to fall. This time, the attack came not with ships or sabotage of airlocks, but with the precise overload of its core relays. The explosion lit the void like a brief second sun, and the shockwave burned out every listening post. For 2 sectors, the Council declared again that this was human work, pointing to fragments of an old Terran military beacon found in the debris. The broadcast carried the image of the beacon across 100 worlds, its worn edges and faded markings like the glare of guilt for those who saw it. As the news reached the black ship, the human adjusted his course, heading for a hidden waypoint marked only in the minds of a few old navigators, the location of a derelict station abandoned generations ago. After a plague swept through its decks here, he would meet with a contact whose name was never spoken aloud, a being who could move ships and supplies without Council eyes ever seeing. The journey was long in the dark between stars was silent. Yet his mind was never still, running through the pieces of the plan, checking for weakness, shaping the next steps. On the council station, the mood had shifted from triumph to urgency. Fleets were being readied not for defense, but for offense. Patrol routes redrawn to push toward human borders. The speaker stood in the war chamber, surrounded by tall displays, each one showing a map of a different sector. Red lines marking attacks, yellow lines marking predicted human fleet movements. The advisors spoke in low, fast voices, debating whether to strike first or demand surrender. The speaker listened, but his mind was already made. The council would move and move soon. The only question was how far they would go. Meanwhile, the human reached the derelict station, its hull a skeleton against the stars. He brought the black ship in slow through a broken docking ring, metal groaning as it adjusted to his landing. The air inside was thin, the light dim, yet movement came from the shadows. A tall figure with eyes like molten silver stepping forward without a sound. This was the contact, and without a word they handed him a small case. Inside were 3 crystal chips, each one containing forged orders, forged enough to move fleets without their captains even knowing who had given the command. With these chips, the human could set the next wave of strikes to appear as council ships attacking their own allies, sowing confusion, suspicion, and the seeds of rebellion. It was a dangerous move, for once the council began to doubt itself, the violence could spiral beyond even his control. Yet he accepted the risk, for the reward was greater. The contact faded back into the shadows, and the human returned to his ship, locking the case into a hidden compartment. He set his course back toward the lanes of the living galaxy, knowing the next phase would not be quiet. In the days that followed, the attacks multiplied. Trade routes burned, supply lines cut, entire colonies left without power or food. Each time, the evidence pointed to humans, and each time the council's fury grew sharper. Yet in the corners of those same reports, whispers began to rise of council ships firing on neutral stations, of patrols vanishing without trace in sectors far from human borders. These whispers had no proof, no images, no clear records, only rumors, yet they spread through the undercurrents of the galaxy like smoke through air. For those who listened, they hinted that not all was as it seemed. The black ship moved unseen, through it all a shadow among shadows, carrying the one who had lit the fire and who now guided it toward a shape only he could see in the endless night ahead. The stars were no longer silent. Across the edge of council space, great fleets moved in lines of fire, their engines glowing like storms in the dark. War had begun without a formal declaration. The first strikes came as sudden as lightning, human border worlds finding themselves under attack. Before dawn, their skies lit with burning ships and falling wreckage. Council warships advanced in tight formations, their banners bright in the void, their weapons tearing through defenses built for skirmishes, not invasions. The people of these worlds had little time to flee, and those who stayed behind became prisoners under foreign banners. The human in the black ship listened to the battle reports carried across the comm networks, his face unreadable as voices spoke of worlds lost, of families separated, of soldiers dying without knowing why they were fighting. Yet he also heard what was not spoken, the slight hesitation in a council commander's tone, the delay between orders and action, the small signs of a machine beginning to grind against itself. For the forged orders he had planted in the derelict station were now moving through the heart of the council's war network. Ships were being sent to wrong coordinates, fleets ordered to fire on allies mistaken for enemies. The seeds of confusion had begun to grow. In the Karolith belt, 2 council fleets met, each believing the other to be a human task force, their identification codes altered by the crystal chips. Their first contact was not with words, but with plasma fire. The belt became a storm of explosions and shattered hulls, fragments spinning through the rocks like shards of glass. When the truth reached the commanders, it was too late. Thousands of lives lost in an hour. The council attempted to suppress the incident, but rumors bled into the underworld. Traitors and mercenaries carried the whispers to every port, saying the council could no longer tell friend from foe. Far away on the human homeworld, Earth, the leaders gathered in underground bunkers, their voices sharp as they argued whether to defend or retaliate. Some called for surrender, believing the Council's strength too great. Others demanded strikes deep into Council territory to show that humanity would not kneel. In the end, they chose neither, instead sending their fleets into a shadow war, raiding supply lines, striking only where victory was certain. Retreating before the Council could form a counterattack, the human fleets became ghosts in the dark, their presence felt only in the wrecks they left behind. The black ship slipped through the chaos, untouched, moving from one hidden port to another, delivering information to those who needed it to keep the fire alive. In one meeting deep within an asteroid hollowed into a secret base, the human handed a datapad to a smuggler queen whose fleet could strike anywhere. Without warning, her price was high, but her loyalty lasted only as long as the credits flowed. He told her where to find a convoy carrying Council war drones. Her laughter echoed in the metal chamber as she promised the drones would never reach their destination. Meanwhile, the Council's unity began to crack in the Great Chamber, where the delegates met. Voices rose in anger. The Kerolith Belt disaster still fresh in their minds. Some accused their neighbors of betrayal. Others claimed the human spies had infiltrated the highest levels. The speaker tried to hold them together, but every new report of lost ships or sabotage stations pulled the threads looser. The alliances that had held for centuries began to fray. Small worlds started to withdraw their fleets to guard their own borders, and in the spaces between these shrinking lines of defense, the black ship moved freely. In the Madarian sector, a battle unlike any before took shape. A Council fleet pursuing what it believed to be a human carrier group found itself facing not human ships, but an entire Madarian defense armada called home. Without warning by its own leaders, the clash that followed tore through the sector's main trade hub, the station's core detonating in a chain of fire that lit the dark for hours. Traders fleeing described the scene as the death of a son. The Council blamed human interference again, but the Madarians began to doubt, for their own records showed no human presence in the sector that day. On the black ship, the humans studied these cracks with the care of a sculptor, shaping stone. Each fracture was a path to the collapse he sought, yet he also knew that chaos could not be controlled forever. Soon the Council would either fall apart or find a new unity in fear. And if that unity came against him, the game would end. He needed one more strike, something so vast, so impossible to ignore that it would force the Council to turn fully on itself before they could turn fully on humanity. That strike began in the shadow of the Veil Nebula, where a hidden shipyard lay tucked inside the swirling gas clouds, building warships for the Council. In secret, the human had learned of it from a dying mercenary whose ship he had saved in an earlier battle. The coordinates now glowed on his display as he approached the plan, with simple plant-forged orders in the shipyard's command systems, telling half the fleet it was under attack by human forces and telling the other half to defend the shipyard from a rogue Council faction. When the two halves met, the destruction would be total. The approach was slow, the nebula's thick clouds hiding his movement from long-range sensors inside. The shipyard workers moved along the hulls of unfinished cruisers, unaware that death was drifting closer. The human sent a narrow beam transmission into the command network, the crystal chip's code sliding into place without a single alarm sounding. And then he waited in the quiet of the nebula, his eyes on the distant flashes of the first mistaken shots as two fleets turned their weapons on each other. Within minutes, the shipyard was a storm of fire, the gas clouds lit from within like a burning ocean. The destruction of the Veil shipyard sent shockwaves across the galaxy. It was one of the largest in Council space, its loss crippling their ability to replace the ships they were burning through in a war. The blame was immediate, yet divided. Some still pointed at humanity, but others began to ask how so many Council fleets could be fooled again and again, how their own defenses could be turned against themselves. The speaker's voice no longer carried the same weight as before. Each word met with suspicion, each order questioned. The human in the black ship smiled for the first time in weeks as he watched the Council's great machine falter. The war was no longer just between the Council and humanity. It was between every faction, every shadow, every hidden knife in the dark. And in that storm, he could move unseen toward the final step of his Plan 1 that would decide not only the fate of the war, but the shape of the galaxy itself. The galaxy was a wound that refused to close. The war had grown beyond the control of the Council fleets, were no longer answering to Central Command. Entire sectors were sealing their borders and claiming independence under their own banners. Trade routes, once watched by joint patrols, now ran under the guns of private warlords and smugglers, and the Outer Rim stations whispered of assassins moving unseen through the halls of power, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. And in the center of this storm, the human in the black ship drifted unseen, his plan moving into its final shape. In the council capital, the great chamber no longer echoed with speeches, but with shouts. Delegates stood from their platforms to hurl accusations at one another. The Medarian bloc claimed the Karolith Belt massacre had been an inside job. The Valari accused the Sci-Fi Dominion of feeding human fleets with stolen codes. The speaker pounded the central dais until the sound was lost in the chaos. When the lights suddenly dimmed and a message appeared on the central hollow, it was a recording of council ships destroying the Vale shipyard, tagged with a voice claiming to be a council admiral ordering the strike. The delegates froze, not because of the accusation, but because the voice was real, belonging to one of their own. The admiral in question was found dead hours later in his private quarters. The security feeds wiped clean, his personal guards vanished, the investigation uncovered nothing, and yet the chamber's tension rose until even old allies would not turn their backs to each other. The human had planted the recording weeks ago, knowing the council would not survive such a wound to its pride. Now the leaders began moving their fleets closer to home, pulling away from the front lines and leaving vast stretches of space undefended. On the edge of the rim, a fleet loyal to the smuggler queen who had once met the human in a hollowed asteroid base struck at a council fuel depot guarded by only a handful of ships. The attack lasted less than an hour. The depot's destruction sending shockwaves through the supply network. Council fleets, already short on fuel, now found themselves stranded in systems far from any dockyard. These abandoned ships became easy prey for pirates and raiders, swelling the fleets of independent warlords. The human had traded them coordinates in exchange for safe passage deeper into hostile space. In a quiet sector far from the battles, the human met with a group of council defectors gathered inside the remains of a derelict research station. They were soldiers and engineers who had grown tired of fighting a war they no longer understood. They had information on a superweapon being built in secret, a weapon not meant for humanity, but for the council's own rebellious factions. The human listened in silence as they described a massive orbital platform capable of unleashing devastation on entire worlds from a single shot, its existence hidden even from most of the council leadership. The black ship moved again, its course set for the world where the superweapon was being constructed, the planet Dathros, to a barren rock rich in minerals, surrounded by defense grids and patrolled by elite guard ships. The approach would be impossible for any known fleet, but the human had no fleet, only a single vessel masked by stolen codes and modified engines slipping through the patrol lines like smoke through fingers inside the defense perimeter. He watched from the shadows as the platform rose slowly from the surface, its massive cannon aimed at the cold void like a predator waiting to strike. Far above in the council capital, the chaos reached a breaking point. The Sci-Fi Dominion announced it was withdrawing entirely from the war, closing its borders and recalling every ship to defend its own worlds. The Medarians declared the speaker unfit to lead and called for the creation of a new alliance without the Central Council. In response, the Valari bloc threatened to unleash their planetary shields and refuse any trade until the council was restored to power. What had once been a single united force was now splintering into shards, each sharp enough to cut the others. The humans sent a transmission from deep within the Dathros system to the smuggler queen, to the defectors, and even to certain factions within the council who still clung to power. He told them of the superweapon and claimed it was nearly operational. He spoke not as an enemy of the council, but as a messenger offering a chance to strike before the platform could be turned on any of them. The result was immediate fleets from opposing factions began racing toward Dathros, not to work together, but to ensure they controlled the weapon themselves. As the rival fleets entered the system, the human moved his black ship into the shadow of the orbital platform, slipping past automated defenses that still believed him to be an allied officer. He entered the station's maintenance bay under the cover of battle. Outside, the fleets clashed in a storm of fire, their weapons lighting the barren world's horizon with arcs of plasma. The human moved quickly, planting shaped charges at key points along the platform's power conduits, knowing that when they detonated, the resulting chain reaction would not just destroy the weapon, but send fragments raining into the fleets below. The battle outside grew fiercer, the comm channels filled with cries for reinforcements and desperate calls for ceasefire. That no one heeded. The factions were too deep in their hunger for control to stop. Now the human set the final charge and stepped back into the cockpit of his ship, his hand steady as he entered the detonation code, and waited. He had one last transmission to send, a simple message broadcast across every open frequency, telling them that the weapon they were dying to claim would never belong to any of them. The charges ignited with a silent flash in the void. The platform's spine split apart in a wave of light, the explosion tearing through the structure as though it were paper. Molten fragments spun outward, slicing through warships from every faction. The shockwave rippled across the system, knocking smaller vessels off course and scattering the survivors in all directions. In the chaos, the black ship vanished once more, engines flaring as it slipped into the dark, leaving only burning wreckage and silence behind. News of the Dathrow's disaster spread faster than any council decree could contain it. No one knew for certain who had destroyed the superweapon. Some blamed humanity, others blamed rival factions, and still others believed the council had done it to keep the weapon from falling into enemy hands. But all agreed on one truth: the war had crossed a line from which there could be no return, and somewhere in the shadows the human watched and waited for the final move, knowing the galaxy was now closer than ever to breaking completely. The galaxy was no longer at war in the old sense, for wars had fronts and orders and goals, and now there was only chaos. Entire sectors burned without reason, ships attacked not for conquest, but for survival, and the council was a hollow name whispered by those who still remembered what it had been in the dark corridors of abandoned stations. Refugees huddled together beneath failing lights, while scavengers stalked the halls looking for anything of value. The trade routes that once pulsed with goods and life were now dead veins, drifting with wreckage and silent hulks that no one dared salvage for fear of hidden mines. In this crumbling order, the human in the black ship became a ghost story told in hushed tones by crews who claimed to have seen the vessel pass without sound or signal, appearing where battles were fiercest and vanishing before the wreckage cooled. Some said the ship was hunting survivors, others claimed it carried messages between warlords, still others swore it was the one that had set the galaxy on fire. None of them were entirely wrong, for the human had moved every piece on the board, and now there was only one last move to make. The smuggler queen, whose fleets had grown fat on stolen council ships, now ruled an empire of shadow stretching across the rim. Yet even she could feel the collapse pressing in as smaller factions rose from nothing, striking at her convoys and worlds. She sent word to the human, offering a fortune in ships and weapons if he would join her side. The reply she received was not in words, but in coordinates to a dead system on the edge of a black hole. She went with her flagship and half her fleet, and she never returned. Her ships drifting slowly toward the singularity as if pulled by an unseen hand. The defectors who had once trusted the human with the secret of the superweapon now commanded their own pocket kingdoms, fortified stations, and fleets loyal only to their captains. They fought each other as often as they fought outsiders, each convinced the human was secretly backing them alone, until one day their long-range comm arrays all caught the same signal, a looped broadcast of their own private meetings and betrayals sent across every channel in their territories. Within days, their fragile alliances shattered, and their worlds were plunged into civil war. On the coreward side of the galaxy, the Valari bloc tried to seal itself away from the spreading ruin, their planetary shields humming with the force of ancient engines. But their isolation only drew more enemies. Fleets desperate for resources slammed against the shields like waves on stone. The Valari leaders called for aid from the remaining council forces, but there were none left to send. The SYDH Dominion had sealed its own borders. The Medarians were locked in endless feuds in the council. Capital itself had become a ruin, its once great chamber empty save for drifting dust and the silent glow of dead consoles. Through it all the black ship moved unseen, slipping through blockades and battle lines, ignoring every hail, until one day it came to rest in orbit above a barren moon far from any trade lane here in the shadow of a jagged canyon. The human stepped out onto the surface for the first time in years, his suit shielding him from the thin atmosphere. He walked to a buried structure, its surface marked with the faded emblem of a human fleet lost long before the war began. Inside the dust-covered halls he reached a chamber where a single console still glowed, faintly powered by some forgotten reactor. He placed a device on the console, and the room came alive with light star maps, filled the air routes and sectors highlighted in deep crimson, representing the spread of conflict across the galaxy. In the center, a pulsing blue sphere marked a system untouched by any faction, untouched by war. The human's eyes fixed on it as his hands moved across the controls, rerouting signal networks and activating beacons hidden in dozens of systems at once across the galaxy. Dormant ships awoke, their cores humming to life. Automated fleets built in secret during the earliest days of humanity's expansion before the Council had even known of Earth. These ships answered only to a single command signal. One by one, they emerged from hidden docks and asteroid vaults, ancient war machines with black hulls and weapons unknown to alien science. They moved without hesitation, converging on the blue sphere in the center of the map. The human's voice finally echoed across open frequencies, every surviving faction hearing the same message. He spoke not of peace or unity, but of reclamation. He told them that humanity had never been their prey, but their judge, that the war they had waged had been the test, and that they had failed. The reaction was instant. Some factions tried to rally their fleets to intercept the approaching armada. Others fell into despair, knowing they could not match the power of machines designed to fight entire wars alone. Battles erupted in systems that had been quiet for months as enemies tried to destroy each other before the humans' forces arrived. Yet the black fleets moved like a tide, unstoppable and cold, sweeping through unprotected sectors, and leaving nothing behind but silence and the glow of burning worlds. On the rim, the last great strongholds fell one by one. The smuggler queen's territory, already weakened, vanished. Under the onslaught, the defectors' kingdoms were erased from the stars. The Valari shields cracked under sustained bombardment, and the once proud council worlds were left as ashes in the void. Still, the human did not stop until every map showed only the pulsing blue sphere at the center, with no borders, no factions, no colors but black. When the last resistance was gone, the black fleets formed a sphere around the untouched system, a wall of steel and fire that nothing could pass. Within the heart of that sphere was a single world, green and alive, the first human colony beyond Earth, a place hidden from the Council for generations. The human landed there, his black ship joining hundreds of others on vast landing fields. As men, women, and children emerged to greet him, they had waited for this day for centuries, living in secrecy and preparing for the return of their fleets. The human walked among them, shedding the name and face he had worn in alien space. He was not a lone wanderer, not a traitor or a rogue. He was a commander of a people who had chosen to disappear until the galaxy tore itself apart. And now their time had come. He looked to the sky, where the black fleets hung like a storm, and he gave the final order, not to attack, not to conquer, but to seal the system forever, cutting it off from the rest of the galaxy. Beyond that wall of ships, the stars burned with the fires of a war that would never truly end. The factions would keep fighting until nothing was left but ruins and echoes. The human's voice was never heard again by alien ears, and his name became a myth in the places where survivors still huddled in the dark. Some called him a savior, others a monster, but none knew the truth, that he had simply taken back what was his and left the galaxy to the fate it had chosen.